Hello and welcome to Terrific Tuesday. It's the 1st of September 2020, so happy Spring Day. And by the dress code, you can notice it's anything but Spring Day today. You'll also notice the door half open behind me. I could not close it today. My cat and I had an argument as to whether it should be open or closed. She won, so it's open. Otherwise, she will continue speaking to us through the door. In this edition today, we're going to be looking at fear. Fear is something we all experience at different occasions, some in small doses, some in big doses. And it is something that as part of our self-development, we should be recognizing and working on overcoming those fears. A great book to read is A Year of Yes, from Shonda Rhimes. Shonda is a TV producer. She produces shows like Grey's Anatomy and Scandal, amongst many others. And she challenged herself to a year of yes. So things that she would normally say no to, she said yes. And when I'm saying no to was because if she was invited to an event and she was afraid she might have to speak to somebody she didn't like or that she would be put into the limelight, she'd rather say no than put herself into those situations. And she talks about how life-changing it was, actually saying yes rather than saying no. So I'd like to challenge you to a month of yes rather than a year of yes. Take this month and before you say no to something that you are asked of, rather say yes, because often once we say yes and we put ourselves in the situation that we were actually afraid of, we find that it's not so bad after all. And that is one way to overcome your fears. And we're not saying say yes to everything. There are times when you need to say no, but you need to know when you are facing a fear or when you are genuinely need to be assertive and say no to someone. But it is a great read if you can get a chance to read it. I know there's some ebooks going around, there's some podcasts going around, as well as some audiobooks. So do yourself a favor and listen to it, well worth a read. In our video today, we're going to be looking at Ruth Soukup, who's going to also talk about fear and one way to get over it, and how to recognize the type of fear that you have. According to their research, there's 7 different types of fear archetypes, and which one do you fit into? Which characteristics fit you? So hopefully you enjoy the video. In our tech tip for today, we are going to be looking at Microsoft Excel. Excel is a very powerful package. And sadly, we don't use it half as much as what we should because we don't realize all the functions that it actually can do. So we're going to start off with a series called Putting the Fun into Functions. And in today's part, we're going to look at splitting cells and joining cells. So in other words, you have one cell with a name and a first name and a surname, and you want to split it. So you've got 2 columns, one with the first name and one with the surname. And then how can we put 2 cells together? So if we've got first name in one column and surname in another, how can we join them so that they are in one column? Now I know this is a problem that a lot of people have. They type a long list and then decide, well, actually they want to make name badges or something and they only want the first name, but now they've got both names in the cell. How do you split them? So hopefully you will enjoy that, and as we go through the series, you'll find that Excel is actually great to use and you will start using it more often. So till next week, keep warm, keep safe, keep your distance, and till then.
So at 23 years old, I was pretty sure I had ruined my life forever. I remember at rock bottom, I opened the phone book to the P section for psychologist, and I stared at that phone for what felt like hours, just trying to work up the courage to make that call. Because in that moment, I was a divorced, unemployed, bankrupt college dropout who had just moved back in with my dad after my last hospital stay because I literally had no other place to go. My arms and legs were covered in ugly scars from all the suicide attempts and self-harm. And most days, I was still so depressed, I couldn't even get out of bed. I was a mess, and I was completely terrified. I finally did make that call, and I said, I've just spent the last 2.5 years talking about every bad thing that's ever happened to me, and it hasn't helped. And now I just need to know how to live. And so for the next 2 years, that's what I did. First, it was learning how to go to the grocery store without having a panic attack. Then it was getting a part-time job and my own apartment. And fighting my way back from that depression, I learned that sometimes courage is just taking that first tiny step and then the next tiny step after that. But eventually I did finish college, and I got married and had a couple of kids and became a fully functioning member of society. I even registered to vote. And then I started a business. And once again, I remembered how it felt to be terrified every single day. I was so afraid of making a mistake, so sure that I was doing it wrong. I felt like everybody else had it figured out, and I was a fraud. Every blog post felt like another opportunity to fail. And while that fear never totally went away completely, it did, over time, get easier. And my business grew. My blog started reaching millions of readers. I wrote best-selling books and created courses and products and resources to help people reach their goals. I even started a podcast. But over and over and over, my students and readers and customers and podcast listeners kept telling me they felt stuck. One told me how she had bought a planner and then just let it sit there for over a year just because she was so afraid of messing it up. Another told me how she had dreamed about starting a business for so long, her whole life, and every time she got close, she stopped because it felt like too big of a risk. Another was in tears when she told me, I just want to want something. And although the symptoms were all a little bit different, I could relate because the underlying root cause was something I knew all too well. It was fear. Not the phobia kind of fear, like the fear of snakes, but this deeper, more internal kind of fear. The kind of fear that keeps us from stepping outside of our comfort zone. The kind of fear that keeps us from taking risks and prevents us from wholeheartedly pursuing our biggest goals and dreams. And it made me wonder, how does fear show up differently for all of us? And how does that impact our ability to push past it? And so I started asking questions, and those questions led to more questions, and ultimately it led me to survey more than 4,000 people on the role of fear in their lives. We had so much data and so many responses that I had to hire an entire team of researchers and psychologists to help me sift through it and make sense of it all. But through all this research, we discovered a couple of really important things. First of all, not all fear is created equal. We all experience fear, but we all experience it a little bit differently. We all have our own fear fingerprint that is completely unique to us. And although fear shows up differently for everyone, it does tend to show up in 7 very distinct patterns, which I call the 7 fear archetypes. Now, each of these 7 archetypes have both positive qualities and negative qualities. There's a piece that's serving you, and there is a piece that's holding you back. And understanding how your fear is serving you is actually just as important as knowing how it's holding you back. But regardless of how it shows up, almost all of this fear happens subconsciously, beneath the surface. We don't actually know that's what's going on. And so whether you call it fear or anxiety or worry or perfectionism or overwhelm or anything else, the end result is the same. We experience it as truth, and we think, well, that's just the way that I'm wired. But that is what makes identifying your fear archetype so powerful. It's sort of like going to the doctor because you have a stomach ache. Before the doctor can help you, he needs to know, do you have a gas bubble or do you have cancer? Because those are two very different things. Your fear is the same way. Without a diagnosis, there can be no cure. But on the flip side, the simple act of identifying and understanding how your fear is showing up is the instant insight into your own behavior and thought patterns that allows you to start changing them. So at this point, you're probably wondering, well, what's my fear archetype? So listen closely as I go through them, see if you can identify yourself, or maybe just figure out what's wrong with all your friends. First of all, the procrastinator, also known as the perfectionist. You probably spend a lot of time doing research and getting organized, and you are always tweaking things right until the last minute. Now, you are the person that takes 6 months to pick out a car because you are so afraid of making the wrong choice. You hate making mistakes, and that can also sometimes show up as a fear of commitment or a fear of getting started. On the plus side, though, you tend to do very good work and have a high attention to detail, which is something you probably take a lot of pride in. Or maybe you're the people pleaser. If so, the fear that holds you back is a fear of being judged and a fear of letting people down, because you care a lot about what other people think. In fact, probably too much. And as a result, you can struggle with setting boundaries or saying no. For you, situations like sitting in a meeting can feel like torture because you will sit there and not say a word even when you disagree, just because you don't want to be the one to cause waves or to make anyone mad. But as a people pleaser, you do tend to do a really good job of getting along with almost everyone, and you tend to be popular and well-liked. And then there's the rule follower. Now, you know that there is always a right way to do things and a proven path that should be followed, right? You don't like straying from that path. You don't even like it when other people stray away from that path. And you are the person who always reads the instruction manual. And if you are following a recipe, you're probably following it to the letter. But this is not always a bad thing either, because as a rule follower, you actually tend to excel when you are given a set of guidelines or a proven framework to follow. Of course, you could be the outcast, like me. Now, we outcasts can be pretty deceptive because on the surface, it might actually appear that we don't care what anybody thinks, but really, that's just our way of protecting ourselves. Because what we fear most is rejection. And so we will push people away and reject everyone around us before they can reject us first. After all, it's way easier to say, that party's gonna be lame, I think I'll skip it, than to show up and risk having no one talk to us. But we outcasts also tend to be very independent and driven to prove ourselves, which can result in a lot of success and accomplishments. And then there's the self-doubter. Now, you struggle with a lot of insecurity because deep down, you are so afraid of not being capable and not being enough. There's that self-talk inside you that tells you this all day long. You're the person who will spend hours crafting the most amazing presentation and then never actually present it because you're so afraid it's not good enough. You can be very critical both of yourself and of other people, which sometimes can have a negative impact on your relationships. But you also tend to be very sensitive and very empathetic, which can be a huge asset. Now, if you are the excuse maker, you are probably very, very smart and an astute observer of other people. But you struggle sharing your own opinion because you're always afraid of being blamed or held accountable if something goes wrong. You like being the person behind the decision maker, but you get a little nervous when you feel like you're being pinned down. Basically, you're the friend that never wants to pick the restaurant because you're always afraid you'll get blamed if no one likes it. And then finally, and especially if you've experienced a lot of pain or trauma or adversity, you could be the pessimist. And the fear that holds you back right now is the fear of experiencing more pain or trauma or adversity. For you right now, every opportunity feels like too big of a risk, and you're afraid of getting hurt again. So you've closed down and almost given up as a way of protecting yourself. Of all the 7 fear archetypes, this can be the hardest one to work through, but it's also the one that is most likely to be just a temporary season. So there you have it, the 7 fear archetypes across more than 60,000 test takers so far. The procrastinator, the people pleaser, the rule follower, the outcast, the self-doubter, the excuse maker, and the pessimist. And if more than one of those resonated with you, you should know that that is actually completely normal. No one is all procrastinator or all self-doubter. Instead, all of these 7 fear archetypes operate on a sliding scale, and all of those sliding scales sort of fit together to form your unique fear fingerprint. You could have one that's completely dominant for you, or you could have several that score high for you, in which case fear is probably having a pretty big impact in your life. But the important thing to understand is that you can actually do something about it. Your fear doesn't have to control you. Because remember, all this fear that I just talked about, it's all happening subconsciously, beneath the surface. We don't actually know that's what's going on. We're experiencing this as truth. But the minute that you can start to identify and understand how your fear is showing up, that is the minute that you can start to do something about it. Because what was subconscious becomes conscious, and suddenly you realize that you have the ability to choose something else. Because when you shine a light on your fear, it's not so scary anymore. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Excel. I'm very excited to do this. I love Excel. I love using the features and the functions in Excel because they do help me be more productive during the day. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a look at functions that can make you productive and get you going through a day in ways that you could never have imagined before. The first function, or I'm going to start off, is with a text function. Now, one of the text functions that you can use is concatenate, and concatenate is wonderful. What concatenate means is it means you can take 2 cells and you can join them together. Concatenate means to join. You can also take 1 cell of information and you can split that cell. So, for example, as I have here in my top here, you have your first names and your surnames in 1 cell. And you realize that it would be best if you actually had them in 2 cells, so that you had a first name column and you had a surname column. Now, what I want you to remember while I'm showing you all this is that the time it takes me to maybe do these 4 names is the same time it would take you if you were doing 300 names. So how many times have you sat and you have typed a list and you have had to copy and paste to the next cell so that you can have 2 columns? If you have a look at the top here, I have got Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Minnie Mouse, 101 Dalmatians in a list in 1 cell, in 1 column. Now I've put 101 Dalmatians so that you can see that this carries over more than 1 cell. Now I've looked at this and I thought, you know what, hold on a second. I would prefer Mickey to be in 1 column and Mouse to be in the next column so that I can have a first name and I can have a surname. If I highlight the names that I want to split over into different cells and I go to my data tab, In my Data tab, under Data Tools, there's something called Text to Columns. If I select Text to Columns, once I've highlighted them, it brings up a dialog box. And from this dialog box, I'm going to select Delimited. And Delimited stands for characters such as commas or tabs separate each field. If you look at the one underneath, Fixed Aligned, it says fields which are aligned in columns with spaces between each field. That does not apply to us. So go for Delimited. It brings up the list I have selected at the bottom. I click on Next, and it shows me where Excel will make the split. And you can see it's made a split at every space that it's found in the columns that are highlighted. I'm happy with that. I say Finish. And if you have a look at the top here now, you can see it has actually split my data into separate cells based on this space. Wonderful. So now when I have a list of names and I want to change it from first name to surname, I can do so, and I can do so quickly. Because remember, like I told you earlier on, doesn't matter how long my list is that I've highlighted, it will take the same amount of time, which is literally seconds. The nice thing as well is if you have your data in a table, and it's, once again, doesn't matter how long the table is, and you do the feature, it will automatically update in the table. So I'm going to highlight my Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and Minnie House because I've got to show it what I wanted to split. I go to my data ribbon and I go to Text to Columns. I select Delimited. I say Next. I say Finished, and my table is automatically updated. Now, why I've put that into the table there is to just go that one little step further to show you. If I want to concatenate, and let me just make this a little bit longer. I'm going to say copy, and I'm going to say paste. I just want you to get the true effect in a table. All right, so I have a list of names here, and I want to join those names. I can click in full name, and this time I'm going to use concatenate. I'm going to use the function. So I'm going to say equals to start off my function, because that is the way you tell Excel you're going to do a function. And I'm going to start typing concat. And you can see it automatically comes up, concat or concatenate. I'm going to press tab to open up my my bracket to start my function. And it says to me, text. So what text is it that I want to concatenate? I'm going to click on Mickey. Mickey shows it. You want to concatenate C18, which is first name. And it instructs me that after I've selected my text, I must put in a comma. Please bear in mind to check what yours asks for. In some Excel versions, it asks, or laptops that you are using, it's not actually Excel, it's the laptop you're using, it will ask for a semicolon. And in some, it will use a comma. It depends on what you have set your keyboard to. In my case, I can see it says text to, and it needs a comma. So I'm going to put a comma. Now, another trick is that you want to have a space between your first name and your surname. In order to put a space in a function or a formula in Excel, a space is a character, and you need to show Excel that it is a character. So you use your inverted commas. I put a space and I close my inverted commas. So I've said to it, I want you to join column C18, which is first name. I want you to put in a space, and I'm going to put a comma because it's asking me to separate what I want to put in. It then says to me, what is your text 3? I can click on mouse, and I'm going to close a bracket because a close bracket means I'm ending my function. So I start my function with an equals to say, hey Excel, I'm starting a function. I open it, what I want it to do, with a bracket, and I close it with a bracket to show it that I have finished my request. If I select enter now, you can see that it's joined the first set of cells and subsequently the cells subsequent to that. And the reason it's done that is because it's in a table. If it wasn't in a table, I would have to go and copy that function down to the rest of the row. So two things here. You can join text. You can split text into different cells. And by putting it into a table, you make it even smarter, because once you've done it the first time, it will automatically complete the rest of the table for you. I hope this is a function that you will start using on a regular basis. I know for me, it is one of the most powerful functions that you can have, and that you use it and have a lot of fun. Till next week.